to the Shishmit U sponsored webcast, Audiences and Attribution, the Next Frontier of Healthy Campaigns. Today's program is being sponsored by Comcast Spotlight and is being presented by Andrea Zapata, Vice President of Research and Insights. Andrea, at this time, would you like to give a little brief introduction about your role with Comcast?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My role at Comcast as a Vice President of Research and Insights is to simply use our data in a way that allows our customers, our clients, to reach their customers. I've been with Comcast Spotlight for a little over a year and a half. Previous to Comcast Spotlight, I spent the previous 6 years in the digital side of the house with both Hulu, when Hulu was an early days PC-only offering, somewhat disrupting the television landscape, and then also at Vivo, which is a partner of YouTube. I spent the previous time at ESPN, growing up steeped in television in the New York office, and I am absolutely excited to be at Comcast Spotlight because we're learning so much about how television truly reaches audiences and customers and ultimately drives attribution or impact, which is simply saying we're driving customers either to your website or to your location in an effective way.
Great. Thank you so much. So we have some rich information being provided today. At this time, I'd like to turn your attention to the right-hand side of your screen. Please type in any questions you have into the Q&A portion on the right-hand side of your screen. We will hold all questions until the end of the presentation, at which time we will address as many questions as time will allow. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Andrea.
All right, thank you. So we're going to go and have a conversation about what audience plus data and content means to your business. I'm going to try to explain each one of these pillars in a way that will hopefully resonate with you and your business. So when we think about audience, we think about those viewers, those consumers of content, of traditional television, be it across a linear screen, so your traditional TV set that's in the living room or in your basement, but also across screens, right? So whether it's on an iPad or a Roku box, wherever that content can be consumed, a mobile device and the such. The audience, the customer, is really the person that you're trying to reach with your commercial, with your 30-second spot. Here at Comcast Spotlight, we sit in a really wonderful position in that we are able to view not only what the customer, the audience is viewing via our set-top box, but we're also able to append that viewership in a privacy-compliant way to customer segments like Experian for not just age and sex demographics, but also for spending, household income, location, but also to like Polk, so if you're in the market for an auto, to any other different segment or third-party data set that can help us enrich the story of the audience consumption that's happening at a national, regional, or local zone level, so in your backyard. The data is very rich, and we'll dive into that a little bit later, but it's what allows us to either target or optimize against reaching your customer. But the beauty of Comcast Spotlight is not only that we have buckets of audience and loads of data, but we're also privileged to stream or to deliver really beautiful content. Our content is television content, and I always joke and say that it's essentially the bar of premium and quality that everyone else aspires to. So it's very engaging, and it's long form, and it supports 15 or 30 ad spots in a way that a lot of other streaming video cannot. So our content is rich and beautiful and full of storytelling and a great place for advertising to run. So when we think about the equation being so simple, we should also address, though, the elephant in the room, which is that audiences have become harder to reach simply because fragmentation is a very real thing. It's much more difficult to reach your customer in just one place because we can look at the consumption that's happening across screens as simply pulling media apart. But here at Comcast Spotlight, we really believe that if you're in the business of reaching your customer and not necessarily dissecting them by screen or by pieces of content at the individual program level, that essentially audiences, your customers, put it all back together. I am a researcher, so I do want to at least set the stage for how it is that here at Comcast Spotlight we have built our research and data team and the way that we build out our stories using data and demonstrating proof on the back end that we did indeed have value. So an audience-focused philosophy is basic media, I say 101, or sort of the core principles of media math. So when we think about reaching an audience or your customer, it's how many people did we reach, how many times did we reach them, and ultimately how long did they spend not only with our content but also with your 30-second commercial. We can look at this in a number of different ways, and I do apologize if this gets too much into the nitty-gritty of media, but there's the way that we're transacted is through ratings, but there's also impressions. We can look at incremental reach, so you've reached a lot of people, not only across television, but maybe radio, digital, print. So understanding sort of how we can loop those all back together so we can see how many people you reached in your backyard is very important. So frequency, time spent, the audience composition, and then the coverage and viewability. It's really important for us to think about how you're reaching your customer and how you reach them, how many times and how often. But really, that's only one side of the house. We think that if you can plan and buy television in a meaningful way, in a way that is reaching your customer in a way that's beneficial, it will ultimately have a very strong impact on awareness, on brand recall, on message association, on favorability. But ultimately, what we're looking for here in TV is to not just say we're an awareness play, so not only did we get your brand familiar with your customer base, but ultimately we're also in a position to have an impact on consideration, and then also what we think is vastly becoming important on the television side is impact to site visitation, location visitation, and transaction. Having been in research now for quite a while, what I've learned is that television has inherently been linked with the upper funnel metrics, so brand awareness, and it's very important that television still remain as a link, as a driver of the awareness of your business. But given the data that we are now able to bring into the television ecosystem, we're now able to deliver insights that show not only did we reach your audience, not only are they more aware of your offering, your brand, and your location, but they're now also being driven to check out your site and visit your location within a short order of time. And that's something that television has never been able to do until most recently. So really exciting times in the television landscape, and I'm going to share some case studies with you guys on how we've seen best practices rolled out. So two sides of the house, audience and impact. They are inherently linked. First things first, though, despite the headlines, audiences still indeed heart television. They love TV. They spend a good amount of time with it. If we were to just think, though, about the differences in how we watch the content, how we measure the content, and how we inform, it's really changed. When we think about the time spent with media content, we're looking here specifically at video. We're going to use Nielsen as our source for this because it's always important to have a third party aggregate the information from their side. Here at Comcast Spotlight, we have our internal data that allows us to look at this holistically, but also at a very granular level, and we'll show you that as well. But when we look at daily time spent with video, television does make up the lion's share of time. The rest being on PC, smartphone, and tablet is going to be more of that short-form video. The reason why television is still really the big driver of time being spent, so TV accounts for 93% of all video usage, is simply because it is long-form. It is sticky in nature. It is storytelling content, and people have been engaging with it for a very long time. It's very hard to accumulate an hour of YouTube clips, but it is still part of the environment of video viewing, and they all complement each other. What has happened, though, with this fragmentation is that it has driven for there to be narrowing reach and scale. So I always like to look back at sort of where we were and where we are now. So when it comes to reaching just adults 25 to 54, in 2001, for a media planner or buyer, it was fairly simple to reach mass audience. You could reach about 50% of persons 25 to 54 with just 4 networks, and those 4 networks in prime time. You basically bought Seinfeld or Friends, and you could call it a day. Now, in 2017, it takes 20 networks to reach the same amount of people. And what's interesting about the networks is that they're not all the same based on your customer base or based on your geolocation, right? So these networks that you see here will be different from me than they would be for maybe a customer who's in the market for another product. So I always like to say we're like TV watching snowflakes. So it's only become much more challenging and difficult in this fragmented environment to reach your customer with a tried and true method of 5 networks, 15 networks, and call it a day. You really have to understand how your audience and how your customer is viewing in a content-filled and option-filled world. Oof, how many more times can I scare you? It's complicated, right? So this is using our internal data here at Comcast Spotlight. I'm going to give you a brief view of what this means. Ultimately, you know, the 820 billion unique viewing combinations is there to just tell you that it is really hard to just select 10 networks and think you're going to reach your customer. There are billions of ways in which you can reach them. Our data is able to look not only at all of the cable networks that are across our footprint, but also the broadcast and then the premium networks. And we know that people aren't just watching the top 5 networks. We know that people aren't just watching the same top 5 networks. They're not unique. They're not the same for each individual. So for us, how can we create this complicated scenario into something that's a little bit different, a little bit easier for you to digest and reach the right customer? I'm going to go back quickly to my days in Hulu, where at Hulu we often looked at content and networks as being a way for you to reach customers, and often the marketplace would come to Hulu and say, well, we've been buying Modern Family, or we've been buying the Kardashians, or Real Housewives to reach her, to reach our mom who's in the market for X, Y, and Z. And we said, well, you could do that, but if you just bought those shows, you'd be reaching 0.003% of her. She's very diverse in how she watches content, so she may be watching Real Housewives, she may be watching Modern Family, but she may be watching SportsCenter, or she may be watching ALF. Again, we don't judge her, but we do deliver her, and we understand with data now that the ways in which you can reach her across a content-rich world has vastly shifted. And here at Comcast Spotlight, we're in the very same place, given what we have with data richness. So with this fragmentation, there is a need to change our approach in order to reach scale. So with a wide breadth of viewing, marketers need to make a more targeted approach in order to reach their customer in a meaningful way. We strongly believe that our set-top box data can help you reach your audiences in a way that you haven't been able to do before. So when we talk about the data that Comcast is currently working with, it does come from that set-top box, that box that delivers content to your living room or any device that you may have. We're capturing 2 trillion viewing events per year, lots and lots of content, lots of shows. We've got nearly 3 billion hours of viewing per month. That means sticky engagement. That means people who are spending a lot of time with us and ultimately your brand. We are national in our scope, but we are able to drill down in 39 states and 79 DMAs. But I think what's most valuable about the data is not on how wide and vast it can get from a national or regional, but how granular we can get at the zone or zip code level. Again, being a media researcher, I've often had to work with third parties who are not able to get at the most granular level without there being integrity lost to the data itself. So our ability to capture second by second, not only viewing metrics, but also ultimately ad exposure metrics is really valuable to you, our clients, when it comes to understanding who you're reaching with your schedule across television. All that data is being captured, but like I said earlier, it means nothing so we can tell you how they're watching, when they're watching. Again, I will say in a privacy-compliant way, but it means nothing unless we can put characteristics to that viewing. So it's very important for us to understand, of that viewing in that household. Is there a member of the family who is in the market to do certain either consumer behaviors or our ability to say they're in the market for a certain product. Again, it allows us to get much more targeted in our approach for you when it comes to reaching your customer. So the set-top box data informs us about actual viewing. And so for here, I wanted to just demonstrate the time that's being spent. So the green is live TV, and the gray will be time shifted, either with VOD or DVR. So for nationally, you're looking at 5 hours a day being spent with live television, and a little bit over 40 minutes with time shifted. If you look at Detroit, very similar. I'm going to tell you, we've looked at every kind of market, every region, and essentially the amount of time being spent with television is virtually the same, but it's what they're viewing that is vastly different. So we'll show you what that looks like here going forward. But in Detroit, you can see they're spending a little less than 5 hours a day with television, but it's not just good enough to know, well, how's Detroit watching television? It's really much more important to you to understand how adults interested in fitness or whatever segment it is that you're looking at is watching television. So this is just one blunt way of looking at time and engagement with content. But we'll show you what this means when we get a little bit more granular when it comes to cable, broadcast, and then premium. I'm showing you 3 different markets here because depending, again, on scale, we can get this information really across the board if we have a presence. So you can see here that across the board, people are spending about 70% of time with cable, about 25, 20 to 30% of their time with broadcast, and then 6% with premium. Just so we're clear here, the premium is going to be HBO, Starz, Cinemax, and Showtime, and the broadcast is going to be ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, but we can cut this in any way that you'd like to see it, especially if you'd like to include like Spanish language networks at the broadcast level, depending on your region and your market needs. But again, just a snapshot of how people are spending their time when they're choosing to spend time with television. And again, understanding not just the blunt basics of the time being spent or the share that's being spent, but understanding consumption by day part. So in Detroit, what we know is 66% of time is being spent with cable, 28% with broadcast, 6% with premium. Detroit, adults interested in fitness, the same. But when we think about how people have traditionally purchased television in the past, they would often put a lot of money in prime, a lot of money in local news, and they would really just carve off small bits or shares of voice, right, with cable. And what we're seeing is that when you do that, you're really missing a lot of potential time with your audience when they're spending it with VOD. So video on demand actually makes up 8% of time spent. Sports actually makes up 7%. And depending on the time of year, there can be variance, right? So in the summer, it can get as low as 7%, but in the fall, it can get as high as 15%. And then the time being spent with local news. So our ability to look at this and just say how our audience is even spending their time is really important for us to understand how to better reach them with our plans and buys across television. Some of the things that we're learning with our data, and this really is about debunking some myths. Having spent the last 6 years on the digital side and then coming to TV, I was still a bit surprised that the way that television is still bought and purchased is in traditional ways that you would automatically think, does that still make sense? So a lot of our buys are coming in with still a heavy emphasis on prime time. When we were looking at the data on how people were spending time with television, what we learned is that 70% of all linear time is actually occurring outside of that prime time window. And then there was also this, I think, this traditional practice where people would pull a television ranker and say, well, let's just see where people are spending the most amount of time, or there's the most amount of reach. And what we looked at is that when we looked at those the top five cable networks, which could be TNT, ESPN, USA, and the like, they were really only making up about 14% of all time spent in a certain market, right? And this is pretty consistent across the board. So only picking the top 5 networks or only picking what you would think a high viewing time is really doing a disservice to you actually reaching your audience. And it really goes back to this idea of we don't want to necessarily put our customer or audience in a defined box. They're viewing at all times, and what they're viewing is really up to them. But what we have here at Comcast Spotlight is the ability to really find them when they're viewing and how they're viewing, and deliver them to you. So the data can be really powerful in debunking some myths. So here at Comcast Spotlight, in the last year, we've really gotten pretty comfortable with having data-driven conversations. And I will say that this is still early days. So for everyone on the phone who is thinking, this sounds maybe a bit more complicated than I'm interested in, and it feels much safer to just buy primetime television or just buy the networks that I know, just please know that we're also early days figuring this out, but it's not as scary as you would think. So I'm going to show you some charts because I am a researcher and I'm going to continue to show you data, but I hope at the end when the questions come up, if you do have questions, we're able to address them. But my goal really is to make this as not as scary as I think it can sound. So our recommendations at Comcast Spotlight are driven by data. This is a very different conversation than what I think television was having this time maybe 2 years ago, but what I think on the digital side has become pretty fluent, which is who are you trying to reach and how do we deliver them. Here at Comcast, we build your plan based on data. So for example here, we'll take our set-top box viewing data, we'll marry that with Polk. Polk is an auto predictor data set. From that, we'll then get a mix of best network combinations, and we'll build rankers for you. We can build a ranker for you that is based on reach or based on efficiency. And what I think is really important here is that traditionally television is bought on just a base demographic of age and gender. So in Detroit, we could say you're trying to reach persons, adults 25 to 54, and you can see a ranker there that is built on reaching an audience based on just that blunt demographic. But if you wanted to reach adults in Detroit who are interested in fitness, you can see that we can build a ranker much more specific to that targeted segment, and it will actually bring up different networks or networks maybe potentially that you hadn't thought of before. So for example, if I was looking at the Detroit adults 25 to 54, I would see True TV as coming up number 1. But if I were to go to Detroit adults interested in fitness, True TV doesn't come up at all. So again, there's a lot of ways in which to think about this, but this is just a really simplified way of saying, how can we help you find your customer in a way that not only benefits you, but also takes into account the data that we have here at Comcast to help you find them. All right, so finding audiences using data to move beyond age and gender targets. I'm going to show you some case studies, and again, I want to make sure that we try to simplify these case studies, but I'll try to give you as much detail as I can. So for this one, the goal for this healthcare network was to increase awareness for the healthcare network's employer-sponsored health insurance products. The process. So the client identified 3 targets. So those targets are their 3 customer bases or audience segments. And they utilized our set-top box data to inform a 6-week campaign. The outcome was pretty good. We achieved a 69% reach with a 12 frequency among a key target in Detroit. I will say, coming from digital, it was always an interesting thing to say, okay, so who are you trying to reach? And we're going to try to get as good as 54%. If you wanted us to put in more targeting, we can maybe get as good as 68%. If you really, really want us to get uber good, 1, it's going to probably cost you, but 2, we can get as good as maybe 80%. So for us, we're really talking in the same, with the same tools and tactics, which is why I think, again, it's just so exciting to be back in the land of television, where we're really starting to amplify the way that we use data-driven tactics. So the customer was very specific on who it is that they wanted to reach, and the way that we have a product here called Audience Intelligence, which implements data-driven audience targeting tactics. So in this case, what we saw is they had 3 segments. Segment A was a business owner or middle senior management, so we reached 69% of households in the Detroit footprint that were in that segment with a frequency of 12.4. Segment B was women 25 to 54 with children under the age of 18. And again, we were able to reach 55% of the in-target. And then segment C was just sort of that blunt demo of adults 25 to 54, and 52% were reached with this campaign. What we saw is when we looked at this week by week is TV does what TV normally does. It reaches a healthy portion of the population in the first 2 weeks, right? And I think that's what is the beauty of television, is our ability to reach a lot of people in a short window of time. But incremental reach can be challenging. So when I first saw this chart, I said, okay, great. So TV operated the way we would expect it to against a pretty particular segment. One thing I also want to bring up, though, during this webinar is that understanding your segment and how many you can actually reach is super important when you consider how you're building a plan. So, for example, this segment A, business owners or middle senior management, I don't know right off the top of my head, but I'm going to make an assumption that they made up maybe about 10% or 15% of Detroit. Our ability to reach 69% of that target demo or target segment is really important and really hard to do unless you use data-driven tactics at the beginning. So I will say understanding how many people you're even capable of reaching is really an important starting point, so that way we can measure what good looks like on the back end. You can see that there's a flattening out here for about 2 weeks. About 3 weeks in between, and that's when the advertiser went dark on television. So you can see as soon as we went back on, we were able to provide incremental, growth and continue growing that reach curve up to 69%. So again, being able to demonstrate, here we reached a customer, you went dark on us. When you came back on, we were able to implement our data-driven recommendations. And the client was able to get incremental reach as the campaign continued. What we're able to do with this sort of campaign, when we use audience intelligence here at Comcast Spotlight for our clients, we provide access to detailed reporting for each segment within an advertiser's campaign. The reason why this detailed reporting is important is it allows for optimization. It allows for improvement. What I will say has been the most interesting thing when we've used this with clients is that, for the most part, what we get pushback or questions about is, I wasn't expecting my customer to be watching the do-it-yourself network or to be watching Oxygen. My gut says that that's not where my customer is. But when we show them the detailed report of not just the total reach, but the reach per spot, the unique reach per network, the delivery of ad impressions, and then the frequency, ultimately the data is what's driving the decision, and then what's making the recommendations for optimization going forward. So what does this look like? For example, when we would go back to you as a client, we would say, so this is how many people we reached. If we're going to do this again, or if there's an opportunity to do in-flight optimization, we know that these networks, so the CNNs, the TNTs, the MSNBCs of the world, those do really well for you always. That's always like an always-on approach. They should be part of your mix going forward and really just be a staple. Where the optimization comes in is considering investing in networks as they reach more of the target on a per-spot basis than the other networks. So in this instance, it was AMC, TV Land, the Weather Channel. We would make some recommendations that potentially there are some networks that are not as efficient as you would think, and so maybe we should drop that from the plan going forward. And then we would demonstrate areas of opportunity, including more high-indexing networks from the pre-campaign media rankers into future campaigns. I've seen a number of these reports go out, and clients who have worked with us, and we've done either a complete data-driven approach where the customer has completely trusted the data and trusted us at Comcast Spotlight to use the data to reach their customer, and we have seen reach as high as 80%. I will tell you that we've also had customers who had said, listen, let's just use half. Let's do it like a 50-50 here, right, where you still put in the networks I think my customer's in. I'll take half of the networks that you recommend, and we will get only as good as 45%. And what's interesting is being able to show on the back end that the networks that you had inherently thought were where your customer were the networks that underperformed or under-indexed in actually reaching your customer. So this data has been really powerful in showing that when you are planning when you're building your plan to reach your customer, it's really important to understand how they're consuming content and then ultimately how they're watching and using the power of the data to really target and optimize against them. All right, so reaching the right audience drives impact. So if you go back to that earlier sort of audience philosophy approach, it's one thing to say we've reached your customer and we can demonstrate that now with very detailed reporting. But it's another to say, did it work? And you should always ask us if it worked. I mean, it almost seems irrelevant if we can provide you with a detailed report and tell you to optimize. But if you're not seeing the benefit of people walking into your location or visiting your website, does it really matter at all? Probably not, right? So we're really getting in the business of not only saying, let us help you plan and buy better, but also let us now demonstrate together, right, whether there was a meaningful impact. So this is for web attribution. This is a healthcare network, and we're using what we call our impact offering. So this is on the attribution side of the house to demonstrate that it did indeed work. So we had a new TV client who wanted to increase website traffic and build brand awareness. Two very lofty things. I mean, that means that you have to take into account not just broad reach, but also a strategic customer approach that's much more targeted. The process, so the client ran a 3-month zoned television campaign. The outcome was successful. The client achieved a 72% lift in new users. So I'll show you how it is that we determine that. We use Google Analytics. And this is something that, again, if you have access to, we can tap into read-only access and help derive stories. Oh no, I'm just realizing and recognizing that for some reason, the lift components of this isn't coming through on the webinar. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? As in, like, when I say % lift, there's nothing there? Can somebody confirm that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, then I'll just read them. Thank goodness I have my mobile phone with me as well, so I can read you the good news story. So when it comes to thinking about television and how we have traditionally been considered, it's really been for that awareness play. But we know that ultimately, for a customer, the journey is the goal from the client side, and the role of the customer is to get them from awareness to consideration to actual intent. So using Google Analytics, we can look at change in awareness. So we'll look at change in total sessions, so the number of website visitors, and then the change in new users. So first time a user visit or a device visits your website. And then in this case, we had a 63% lift in total sessions, which you can't see here, so I apologize for that. And then a 72% lift in new users, so prior versus current. Consideration, as we define it, is a change in direct or organic sessions, so the number of users that typed in the URL into the search engine. And what we saw here was an 8% lift in direct organic sessions prior versus current. Also, you should just know that the way that we determine this is we looked at May through July of 2017, and we compared the same time period, May to July of 2018, so we were able to sort of get a benchmark of when they were not using television to when they were using television, and a change in metrics. An intent. So if we remember, this client was really interested not just on the awareness, which I think we did a pretty good job with 63 and 72% lift, but also in intent, which is defined as website traffic. And in this case, we got an 11% lift in the number of users that completed a particular goal or action, and a 27% lift in homepage views. So again, we were able to demonstrate that having used television for the first time, there was a substantial lift in awareness and a good amount of lift to intent from having used television for the first time. So again, a really great way for us to be able to demonstrate impact. I'm going to show you another example, and hopefully this one comes up, but if not, I can read it to you. In this instance, we were looking at an increased web traffic by targeting 2 health segments, gain appointments for a breast care awareness campaign. We wanted to gain appointments for a breast cancer awareness campaign. The client ran 3 months of targeted TV campaigns against a mosaic targeting. So just so you understand, mosaic targeting is our ability to use different segments to help identify a client if, per se, we don't have it with like a Polk or Experian. It's a great way for us to understand either a segment, so aging in place, right? So the key features are they're retired, they're financially secured, they're AARP members, and we're able to then define not only who they are, but then target them using the same data-driven tactics that we did earlier with the other segments. The outcome is that the client achieved lift in the individual pages in their website and doubled their target mammogram appointments. So huge success, but let's again look at the numbers. So the campaign performance, we were honing in on the lower funnel on intent. It was really important for them to demonstrate that people did indeed actually visit their site. Just because you can't see it here, and I want to make sure that you guys are aware of the time, the campaign period. This was comparing July to September 2017 to July-September 2018, again, just to get a baseline. And we saw lists in individual website pages. So we were able to find that there was an 11% lift to find a physician versus the prior year. There was a 16% lift to making an appointment and a 17% lift in the health library. Again, we thought ultimately the ultimate goal was to get appointments, and the appointment goal was 50, and the appointment result was actually 100 plus. So the client had given us a goal of 50, not us. And I will say, I just want to be very clear, this is one way to measure television's impact, but there are a number of different factors that play into this, and this is early days for television attribution. But this client really felt that their television presence allowed them to supersede their goal of 50 and get get more than 100, which was really a huge success for them, and really felt that their investment on television demonstrated a positive and yielded a positive outcome. I will say that we are currently looking at not just using Google Analytics, which again is a little bit noisy because there can be other factors involved like radio or out of home that can also build either awareness or spark an interest in visiting a site. We're working also here at Comcast Spotlight to demonstrate that within a 30-minute window of exposure to your ad, we can demonstrate lift to your website. We're working early days with a company that we're able to get a baseline of your site and then ultimately demonstrate on the back end once we ingest the ad logs, give them to the third-party vendor. They're able to measure after exposure to the spot if somebody came to your site within 5, 10, 15, or 30-minute window. So again, it's that immediate impact versus this is more of a latent impact. But again, we're just getting much more sophisticated in our conversation and our dialogue and proving to you that your investment on Comcast Spotlight was truly valuable. So with that, I just realized we don't have a closing slide, so I'm going to go up to the very top. But I am open for questions, and I hope that this sparks a healthy dialogue.
Thank you so much, Andrea. We do have a few questions in queue, but at this time I'd like to open the floor up to questions. Feel free to type them into the Q&A section located on the right-hand side of your screen. One of the questions we had, with the large amount of set-top box data, are you able to determine how many people are fast-forwarding through commercials?
So we are, let me make sure that I'm going to say this correctly. We can determine if there are people indeed fast-forwarding through commercials. In our VOD environment, so if we go back to the slide where it was basically 44 to 45 minutes that was being spent in a time-shifted environment, about half of that is in our VOD environment, our video on demand, and there isn't the capability to fast-forward. And then when they are using a DVR capability, we can capture that as well.
Great, thank you. And the other question we have, what age group is the 93% of TV video viewing?
That's 2+, right? So that is a really, like, everybody and their cousin, right? I will say that it depends on the demographic, how much time people are spending with television. And I think that's an excellent question, because one of the first things I said when I got here is that ultimately not everyone is spending the same amount of with television, simply because of the way that they view and consume content. Ultimately, though, and I'm going to maybe stray a little bit off the reservation here, I normally get the question of, well, you know, that time isn't nearly as much as what it once was. Or if you're an agency, typically, you know, ratings are down. And I think what's so beautiful about moving to this audience world and then ultimately the attribution or the proof world is that it won't matter if ratings are down, or it won't matter as much if time being spent with television is down, because ultimately we're now in the business of delivering your customer. And so I always say ratings are down, who cares? Who are you trying to reach? Because in that world, we have buckets of your customer, and it's using our data, we're able to reach them in a meaningful way, and supply has never really been a problem.
Thank you. And another question. We don't do a lot of TV cable advertising because we are not in a major DMA. When will you be able to pay for advertising by zip code?
Oh, we can. I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand. And maybe it's because we don't have a ton of penetration in your market. I want to make sure I understand that. And if there's a seller on the phone who might want to answer this in a better way. But one of the great value propositions of Comcast Spotlight is that we can sell at the zone level. That might be different than zip code. I apologize for that. But we can get very granular as to how we can at least carve out your market zone to be able to target more efficiently. So hopefully that's helpful. But I'd love to know who's asking that question so we can follow up in a much more specific and appropriate way.
You'll receive that information in an email, Andrea.
Wonderful. So that way I can make sure that we put the person with the right person as to how it is that we can actually sell.
We are at the Q&A portion of today's call. Feel free to type your questions into the Q&A section on the right-hand side of your screen. Do we have any additional questions or comments at this time? Do you count the impressions of those that fast forward on VOD?
So VOD is 99% not able to fast forward, but we don't. If your spot was not delivered in full or viewed in full, you're not charged for that. So just so we're clear on that aspect, but it is definitely, and it's so interesting that you use the word impression. I wish I could see you all and have a dialogue, because I'm always keenly interested in having a conversation about impressions versus grips or trips, and how we sort of move our television space to an impression-based world. But just so you know, yes, VOD is really, just for this call as well, you guys should know, whenever we pull a ranker, our video on demand, so it's part of our PDTV offering, but it is typically in the top 5 of time spent against almost any audience segment. So I think that our VOD environment is a fantastic place to be, simply because there is less ad load, so less ad clutter, and the ability to fast forward is really dismantled there. So it's a pristine, wonderful environment, and the person who's choosing to watch VOD, to lean in, is really an avid or engaged viewer. And what we've learned with our set-top box data is that if you are a light viewer of linear television, so a light viewer of what traditional television, live TV, you're actually a heavier viewer and user of our VOD offering, and you tend to be younger, which just makes sense.
Another question we have, what data do you get from set-top boxes?
Yeah, that's a good question. What data do we get? So we get how people are viewing, what they're viewing, right? So it's a second-by-second feed, and it allows us to look specifically at viewership of content, and then from there we can marry the viewership. So program level. I just want to make sure I'm briefing, or I'm gliding by it. So what we're looking at is not just Comcast Spotlight insertable ad networks, but we're looking at all the cable networks. We're looking at not just cable, but we're looking at broadcast, as we showed you earlier, and not just broadcast, but also the premium networks. I like to look at everything holistically, so you get a really good understanding of how people are watching TV in your backyard. But then ultimately, when we build you a plan, our network ranker, it's going to be based on the ad insertable networks that we offer within your marketplace. So the data is to network, to content across the entire spectrum of offering in your region, and then it is also the ability for us. So then from there, what we do is we append data segments, so audience or customer segments to it. So it can be third party, like I said earlier, with Experian or Polk for auto or L2 for political. And then we also have our ad exposure data. Our ad exposure data is our ability to say we know when your spot ran against not just the content, but also against that segment, your customer ultimately. And then the next step is, what do we do with that data? Well, then we want to prove that we had an impact, which is what we were able to show with some of the case studies here. But the data is, like I said, second by second. It's near census level, and it's really a great way to enhance what you may already be doing with third-party data sets like Nielsen or ComScore, Scarborough, and the like. Those are also very important third-party offerings to get a sense of who your customer is and how you should reach them across media. But for our example, for what we're doing here at Comcast Spotlight, we're using our internal data now to really get much more targeted and to use it as a complement to the third party. Hopefully that helps. Set-top box data is linear and BOD, so it's the live viewing, it's the delayed viewing across BOD, and we'll soon incorporate IP.
Great. Our next question, is the data all at a household level as opposed to an individual level?
Yes. So that is a very good question. It is at the household level, right? So we don't know who exactly is watching the content or the spot. So I want to be clear about that. So for example, in my household, it's me, my husband, our 2 children. We cannot identify at this moment if you're in the market if you have a beer ad, I'm just going to be, if I'm viewing it, or whether my husband's viewing it, or whether my 6-year-old son is viewing that Miller Coors ad, we can't identify. However, we are able to get the characteristics of the household, and we think that at this point that is pretty strong, considering the other alternatives of panel-based and survey. Survey is traditionally how a lot of this is captured. So for us, this is really a huge step ahead of at least being able to identify a household with the characteristics that you're looking for.
Thank you so much. We do have time for questions. Feel free to type them into the Q&A section located on the right-hand side of your screen. This is very good discussion. Our next question, in the case studies, what was an average cost based on broad parameters?
What was the average cost? I don't know the information on that. We can get back to you. Hopefully there's a way that we can. Typically, I've seen everything across the board. We do not have minimum thresholds per se for us to be able to show you an impact. We do, though, require a couple of criteria. One being that either you've been a customer of cable before and then you went dark. There must be, or there's a shift in how you buy and plan us, so that way we can see if there was any meaningful shift in the metrics themselves. But for right now, this is using Google Analytics. So we would recommend, it doesn't have to be an astronomical spend, but it should be over a good window of time. and your account executive can give you the parameters for that. For the product that I spoke about earlier, which is looking at the ability to demonstrate lift within a short window of time, that is actually now in 13 markets across our footprint, and that requires a minimum spend of $10,000 per month with a commitment up to 6 months. So just so we have a baseline there.
Thank you, Andrea. And then we have another question here, which is actually a two-part. How specifically can we target in terms of audience dimensions? What types of data are available, and is it all based on viewing habits, or are there any other data inputs to help determine the audience?
All right, I just want to make sure I understand audience dimensions. It's unfortunate that we don't have a dialogue. Can you read the question, the last portion of the question again, please?
Sure. It says, what types of data are available, and is it all based on viewing habits, or are there any other data inputs to help determine the audience?
Yeah, so the data, so we start first with the viewership, but when we append the segments, that's where we get sort of more of the dimension is what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking you're asking, but that's what allows us to get the characteristics of, are you in the market for an SUV? Right? Do you currently have this type of car in your garage and you've owned it for this long, which would then help us determine whether you're going to be in the market, so you're an intender. That allows us, again, to just give it more depth. We are also working, so I'm like sighing a little bit. So I've been here for a year and a half, and in that time, we've been able to harness our set-top box, append third-party segments, and also demonstrate ad exposure, which is still early days, I will say, but we're learning a lot. What we're also keen on doing, though, is building out custom audience segmentation. There's a lot of information that you can harness based on viewership that can help us deliver more unique and custom audience segments to our client base. So hopefully that helps. There's also an opportunity over time, or at least maybe not right now, but we're endeavoring and would love to have a conversation about first-party data. What are you doing with your first-party data? That is another way for us to think about using our data, marrying it. There's a lot of qualifications and criteria that has to happen there, but that's something that we're looking to do more in the mid or late of 2019. And that's something that I think television is going to need to do in order for us to really get at your customer base in a much more meaningful way.
Thank you so much. Another question. Where does Netflix, Amazon, etc. fit into the cable/premium/network mix?
Yeah, so, okay. Full transparency, we cannot capture or show, well, we capture it, we cannot show it based on our licensee agreements with the Amazons and the Netflix of the world. I will say what's so admirable, I think, and what really, I think it's such a testament to Comcast and being so respectful of the user experience is the fact that Comcast put within its own environment the Netflix and the Amazons of the world, the Pandoras of the world. Essentially, we're saying, you as a user, as a lover of entertainment, we're going to make an entertainment containment machine. And so if you want to watch Netflix, or if you want to watch USA, or if you want to watch your local news, it's a one-stop shop. And so, yes, does our set-top box data capture all of that? Absolutely. Are we able to show you and demonstrate the time being spent on that and what that looks like? Absolutely not. What is very interesting, and we've done some work with Nielsen, because Nielsen is a third-party vendor who can at least give us some broad strokes on how people are using, is that people are just consuming all of these things together. And when you put them in one environment, they just become heavy users of all that they're offered. So what I think the opportunity for Comcast Spotlight in an environment where you have Netflix and Amazon Prime as your next door neighbors in an environment is that for us, we can support a 15 or a 30-second commercial spot, while the Netflixes and the Amazons of the world currently do not, right? So we think it's really important for us to understand that while time is being spent with video and in videos where ads are not being supported, we offer a really awesome opportunity for you to be able to insert your ad when they choose to watch cable and broadcast and the like. So we are, I think, in a healthy game of video consumption and reaching audiences, and then being able to obviously insert your important commercial message.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And then we had to the earlier question about data inputs to help determine the audience. The asker has submitted, maybe to help clarify, in the case study, how did you determine which viewers were business owners or middle senior management? Was this solely based on viewing data through the set-top box?
Sorry, no. So that was based on marrying our viewership data with a Mosaic segment. And the Mosaic segment is a third party, so it's using like Scarborough essentially, right? And so our ability to use a segment using the mosaic that's most important to you, and then appending it to viewership, that then allows us to build a network ranker. I hope that makes it clear. So the output is a network ranker based on the viewership of the customer you're trying to reach. And the ranker, it can be based on reach or efficiency, so over-indexing based on efficiency. So for us, we think that's a really great way for you to be able to reach your target customer without having your own internal data to bring to the table. And us, we're never going to know if we're reaching a small business owner or a person who's in the market for an auto unless we append third-party data to it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrea. At this time, we do not have any additional questions in queue. If you'd like to give your closing remarks.
All right, absolutely. So guys, thank you so much for joining this call. I appreciate the questions and the time you spent listening to the learnings we're having with audience and attribution. I personally don't think there's a better time to be in media or to think about customers reaching their clients in a much more richer and more meaningful way than now. And I'm excited for the future. So thank you for your time. Thank you to Shimda. I'm gonna say it wrong. For inviting us. Shizmid. Okay, Shizmid, for inviting us and giving us this great audience, and appreciate it. Have a great Wednesday, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for presenting this great information. We'd also like to thank Comcast Spotlight for sponsoring this program. Those of you who have registered for this program will receive the recording on tomorrow. Watch your emails. And we'd like to thank you for your participation on today's call, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.